Tales from Earthsea, known as Gedo Senki in Japan, is a Ghibli movie that had a lot riding on it, and whose critical and commercial failure can still be felt within the studio today. There was excitement, expectation, and ultimately disappointment from both sides of the Pacific Ocean, and a huge amount of drama surrounding the production of the film. But today I want to discuss why Tales from Earthsea flopped, whether it deserves its negative legacy, and finally, what's in the power of a name.
あなたの名前はハイタカだ。
Before we do this, I need to know your name.
Oh, that's sweet.
If you know a demon's name, you can control it.
Is that so?
That's what all the books say.
There's a common strain of logic in fantasy, and you'll have likely come across it before. From the fairy tale Rumpelstiltskin and The Hobbit,
Who are you, and where do you come from?
to Harry Potter
We do not speak his name.
and The Never-Ending Story,
Call my name!
names have power. Anime has a similar fascination. Swords in Tite Kubo's Bleach are awakened by finding and calling their true name.
Now shout out my name!
Zangetsu!
So, your name's Chihiro.
Yes, ma'am. What?
And in Spirited Away, Sen's true name, Chihiro, is tied to her freedom under Yubaba's spell.
And it belongs to me now.
In the Earthsea Cycle, a series of 6 books written by Ursula K. Guin, names are massively important.
The magic in Earthsea is mostly naming magic, which of course is an old kind of magic on Earth, practiced by many, many peoples. If you know the true name of a thing or a person, you have power over it. You can control it.
Everything in Earthsea, animate or inanimate, has a true name. Learning these names give wizards and sorcerers dominion over these things. People guard their true names, perhaps only ever telling it to a spouse or close friend, if to anyone at all.
It's a terrible thing to hear one's true name called by strangers, Alder said.
With a series so obsessed by the power of a name, it's perfect and poetic that Goro Miyazaki, whether by choice or design, helmed this feature. After all, there are a few people out there who feel the weight of a name as much as the son of Hayao Miyazaki. Goro Miyazaki, director of Gedo Senki, had one of the most unenviable legacies to try and live up to. Born to Japan's most beloved and important anime director, Goro never really stood a chance at carving out a name for himself in the medium, so he didn't try. Despite loving animation as a kid and being raised on his father's movies, whilst an ever-absent Miyazaki Sr. worked tirelessly on his next masterpiece, Goro grew up wanting nothing to do with the industry. He instead studied agriculture at Shinshu University. He was content, having decided in his formative years that he would never be able to reach the level his father had attained. Around the time Goro Miyazaki would have been studying in Nagano, his father was reaching out to Ursula Guin, seeking her blessing to make an Earthsea movie, stating that it was something of a dream project of his.
And he had an early interest in Earthsea, which I kind of discouraged because I didn't know anything about him, and I thought he was a sort of Disney-type animator, and I just didn't want anything like that touching my book. So I kept saying, no, go away, go back to Japan,
It was only after being shown his movies some 20 years later that Le Guin realised what a talent he and Studio Ghibli were, and sent him a message finally offering the Earthsea license. Unfortunately, Hayao Miyazaki was waist-deep in the development of Howl's Moving Castle at the time, though this didn't stop him, along with longtime Ghibli producer Toshio Suzuki, speaking with Le Guin and fighting for the movie regardless. Despite the fact that Hayao Miyazaki wasn't personally available to direct, under their promises of strong leadership she accepted, and the project was fatefully passed on to Goro Miyazaki.
People always say, when did you decide you wanted to be a writer? And I never wanted to be a writer. I just wrote. That's what I did.
Le Guin is a fascinating woman, with a career in literature so acclaimed and long-running that it rivals Hayao Miyazaki's own in animation. Known mainly for her work in science fiction, the Earthsea Saga was something of a departure for her. Spanning 6 books and a few short stories over the course of 38 years, the saga won international acclaim and Le Guin universal recognition.
The publisher of Parnassus Books came to me and said, would you write a young adult novel? And I said, no. I've never written for children. I've never written for an audience. Specifically, I couldn't do that. I sort of ran away. I was terrified.
It was maybe this hesitancy from the author that coloured so many of the characters and themes that populated the Earthsea Cycle. Every book in the series has this recurring element of escape, characters running from evil or their own dark destinies. In A Wizard of Earthsea, for instance, Ged races over land and sea to outrun a Gebbeth, a horrifying being of shadow he arrogantly summons into the world.
The hood turns to me. It's full of writhe and darkness, no face. The cloak slides away, and there and then, with no hesitation, the shadow stands upright, tall, and speaks one word. And I'm a dead man, or worse.
Our protagonists ultimately find peace facing their demons. Similarly, Goro Miyazaki may have attempted to outrun his father's legacy, but, much like in Earthsea, that sort of thing has a tendency to catch up to people. After graduating university, he became a landscape artist and worked there for 8 years before being offered the opportunity to design the wonderful Ghibli Museum in Mitaka, a pilgrimage most fans will want to make at least once in their lifetime. After completing this project and serving as a director of the museum for 5 years, Goro seemingly made peace with his father's legacy. Working with Ghibli without stepping into his father's shadow seemed to open a door for Goro, who was brought onto the Earthsea project as a consultant. Following that, he was set to work as a storyboard artist, where his passion and talent were noticed and, finally, rewarded with an offer of a directorial role. Where better, then, for Goro to face down his own Gebbeth than with an adaptation of Earthsea? The books are wildly popular in Japan, and Goro Miyazaki writes on his blog that, when he was a child reading them, he always saw himself in Ged. Arrogant, stubborn, but hopefully with room to grow and overcome his demons. It's not hard to imagine that when Goro was offered to direct Gedo Senki, the opportunity felt like a strangely appropriate place to do just that. His first feature film had been decided. Not content with having one exceedingly high bar set by his father, Goro challenged another. When it comes to classic literature, Earthsea is one of the medium's most beloved and important fantasy works of all time. Miyazaki Sr. thought his son was not ready to direct a feature. Miyazaki Jr. soon found himself heading a film of huge import without the guiding hand of his father.
間違ってこの世界入っちゃってるわけです。そこからね、それが一番最初の出発点にあって、やっぱりそこからスタートして自分の作品として映像を作りたいっていうね、とこから始まってないわけですよ。でそうすると自分にとってのやっぱりね、その自分の能力に対する疑問もあるし、それから経験のあるなしもあるし。
Under the advice of producer Suzuki, Goro even partially adapted his father's manga, The Journey of Shuna, within Gedo Senki, taking a lot of visual cues and thematic elements from the title after hearing that Miyazaki had once mused it had the atmosphere needed for an Earthsea adaptation. Despite this, the development of the film caused a heated tension between the two, and throughout the entire production of Gedo Senki, they never spoke. Considering all of this, is it any wonder that the movie starts with a young prince committing patricide? Long live the king indeed. Released in Japan in 2006, Gedo Senki took 4 years to come to American shores thanks to an outstanding license for the rights to Earthsea, one owned by Sci-Fi, who had produced a miniseries based on the same work a couple of years prior.
I've been waiting for you, kid.
when the waiting is over.
If you're one of the detractors of Goro Miyazaki's debut feature, check it out. You might come away with a much more generous appreciation for what he achieved with his own adaptation.
Exactly.
Thankfully, the miniseries never came to Britain, and instead the film swiftly arrived in the UK a year after the initial Japanese release. We skipped the 4-year wait and questionable dub, getting a limited run in theatres thanks in no small part to this genuinely monumentous occasion.
And the Oscar goes to, let's see, Spirited Away, Hayao Miyazaki.
Gedo Senki isn't so much an adaptation as it is an homage. During its 2-hour runtime, Gedo Senki doesn't adapt any one particular book from Earthsea's 5 main volumes. Instead, it presents a medley of arcs and ideas from all of them. Fans of Earthsea will spot plenty of familiar locales, characters, themes and moments, and in them a deep understanding, if not an adherence, to the source material. The characters have likewise been diced up and reassembled incorrectly, but not in an entirely unpleasant manner. Aaron, for instance, is at once the prince we know from the books, but also boasts elements of a young, arrogant Ged, seemingly plagued by a Gebbeth of his own design, a shadow that represents his darkness and mistakes. He also has moments of Alda from The Other Wind, a man haunted by the other side, and the young master of Re Albi, a character whose life essence is sucked dry in order to give his grandfather everlasting life. Aaron's sealed blade is also a good metaphor for the book's pacifist ideals, that is, until he unsheaths it near the film's close. Regardless, spotting these references and reimaginings is enjoyable, and allows the film to address many elements that wouldn't have made the cut otherwise. A lot of important things don't make it into the film. The movie takes place almost entirely on land, despite the intense focus Le Guin gives seafaring throughout nearly every book. But I was surprised by the moments that were translated entirely faithfully. A scene with an ex-sorceress in the marketplace of Horttown always stood out to me in the books, and I was thrilled to spot it represented verbatim in the movie. 10 Hours Aside about Ged rescuing her from the tombs of Atuan is similarly lovely, and a special nod to events that couldn't have possibly worked on screen.
たった一人で暗いアチュアンの墓所の中から
The scene of the two-faced village gossips gives a succinctly ugly snapshot of a society Le Guin spent an entire novel describing. The film is chock full of beautiful moments and increasingly leisurely cuts, allowing the movie room to breathe and explore Earthsea's rural roots. We see wonderfully extended scenes of our characters working a farm and becoming a family. Ghibli have always been great at animating food, but it's Ged drinking on the border of this shot that I particularly love. You can feel his thirst from a hard day's work being quenched with every frame. Then there's this arresting, lonely song that halts any forward momentum to be sung in its entirety.
心何に例えよういつも一羽で飛んでいるあなたもきっと寂しかろう共に道行く人だけど
All of this is great, but it does, however, make the film a little long in the tooth, and audiences may find themselves flagging around the 1-hour mark. During a screening for the movie, Hayao Miyazaki famously ducked out halfway through for a cigarette, claiming it felt like he'd been in there for hours. In its last third, Gedo Senki becomes a little messy, and ditches all allusions to its source material completely. The villain resides in a conveniently local castle built like the final stage of a video game, and an important plot point in the Earthsea Cycle becomes a last-minute Deus Ex Machina that only serves to confuse viewers who haven't read the books. In this last half hour, however, Gedo Senki finds a thematic obsession with life and death that is incredibly faithful to Le Guin's vision. She dedicated the entire Earthsea Cycle to this theme, with all 6 books exploring in full humanity's relationship with death. It's a surprisingly dark, deep subject for a series for children, but an important and necessary one. The creation of Ea, a 5-line epigraph that precedes both book and film, anchors Earthsea's core tenets on this balance. In the movie, Ged, here played wonderfully by Timothy Dalton, a standout of the English dub, drives this point home in traditionally gravelly fashion.
Listen to me, Aaron. No man nor any living thing in this world preserves their life forever. But only to men is it given to know that we must die, and that is a precious gift. This life that is both our torment and our treasure was never meant to endure for eternity.
Gedo Senki is by no means a perfect movie, but I do think people do it a great disservice to write it off entirely. There's a fantastic artistry to Gedo Senki, and a wonderful, moving, musical score paired with atypical and outstanding Japanese voice acting. It's stretched too thin in parts, thanks to an attempt to condense far too much content into a 2-hour movie, a sin many adaptations fall foul of. Perhaps worst of all, Gedo Senki struggles to make sense to uninitiated moviegoers and book fans alike. Newcomers will be left confused by a great deal of events that aren't explained well, whilst readers may be asking where the Earthsea they know and love is in all of this. But I don't believe Gedo Senki was intended to be a faithful adaptation, rather an approximation of Earthsea's core ideas and themes. And in that, I truly think it's a success. It's told in elegantly broad strokes that deliver a powerful, relevant message, even in its fantasy setting. At the end of Earthsea's first book, there's an epilogue that speaks at length about how these stories differ depending on who tells them. They're spun and sung and split over time, until there's a host of differing tales of the same story. By my reckoning, Goro Miyazaki's Earthsea is just another one of these variations, where the elements are familiar, the themes ever present, but the finer details hazy and homespun. In a world as wonderful and as strange as Earthsea, I don't mind being taken by surprise when I revisit it. In fact, I quite like it that way. The immediate impact of Gedo Senki is well documented. Hayao Miyazaki, a famously tough critic who doesn't pull his punches, stated that with one movie, his son should stop making movies, though later went on to offer that it was honestly made, so it was good.
That's a pretty hard act to follow, you know.
When Goro Miyazaki travelled to Ursula Le Guin's home to show her the finished product, she simply said, "It is not my book. It is your movie. It is a good movie." I think that's a pretty perfect summation of Gedo Senki, but Le Guin later followed it up with a detailed review on her website that explains exactly why the movie let her down, including its whitewashing of a cast that was originally mostly black or red-brown. Ultimately, wider criticism of Gedo Senki boils down to one important question. Should Goro Miyazaki have helmed an animated movie with no prior experience in the field? These are the questions that his father, Le Guin, and critics around the world would ask following the release of Gedo Senki. Most would argue that he was offered the director's chair on the strength of his name alone. It went on to win Worst Movie of the Year and Goro Miyazaki Worst Director. Both of these are laughably unjustified in my opinion, but the message they delivered rang clear. Goro Miyazaki should quit making movies. Thankfully, Goro didn't listen. He went on to make the lovely From Up on Poppy Hill, which was made with the help and one would assume blessing of his father. He also directed Ronja the Robber's Daughter, a 24-episode TV show that marks Ghibli's first foray into episodic content and CGI animation. It was also well received. What I set out to prove isn't that Tales from Earthsea is a misunderstood Ghibli classic, or that Goro is just as good a director as his father. What I want for Tales from Earthsea isn't for you to give it a second chance, though I definitely think it deserves it. But if not that, at least spare it a second thought. So I'll leave you with this. It took Hayao Miyazaki 28 years to go from the castle of Cagliostro to the seminal Princess Mononoke. Goro Miyazaki's legacy is just beginning. Thanks for watching. If you're currently enjoying the strange fog of déjà vu, don't worry, you're not going crazy. This video was originally uploaded last Christmas, but was recently removed thanks to a flurry of copyright strikes, so I've reworked a lot of the offending content to keep the YouTube wolves at bay. A month after this video originally debuted, Ursula Le Guin sadly passed away, but she lives on in her beautiful published works. They're a gift, and they should be treasured as such. I'll be back in the new year with a video on the seminal Cowboy Bebop. If you'd like to know when that lands, hit the subscribe button or follow me on Twitter. If, instead, you think this video should have stayed offline and retained its seductive banned status, hit the like button and I'll continue being the bad boy I clearly am.